He thought she was just another black woman he could intimidate, until she walked into court and destroyed his career. The road was nearly empty that night. A few cars rolled past, their headlights bouncing off wet pavement. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the stretch of highway outside Birmingham, Alabama. It was late, just past 11, the kind of hour where most people just wanted to get home. Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson had been driving for nearly 2 hours, her fingers drumming lightly against the wheel, humming along to the soft rhythm of an old jazz tune playing through the speakers. She wasn't in uniform, just a simple black sweater and jeans, hair pulled back. She didn't stand out, or so she thought. Then she saw the lights in her rearview mirror, red and blue, flashing, gaining on her fast. Her stomach clenched. Not out of fear, she knew how these things went, but out of exhaustion. She signaled, changed lanes, and eased her car onto the shoulder. She put the car in park, took a slow breath, and kept both hands where they could be seen. She had been in the military long enough to know the drill. A white patrol car stopped just behind her. The officer took his time getting out. When he finally did, he moved like a man who expected obedience. Heavy boots scuffing against asphalt, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a flashlight that flicked on as he approached. She turned her head slightly, watching him through the side mirror. The name on his badge caught the light. Briggs. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation. His voice was flat, practiced, impatient. Renee met his eyes in the mirror, then reached slowly into the glove compartment, pulling out her documents. "Was I speeding, officer?" she asked, her voice steady. Briggs didn't answer right away. He took the papers from her hand, holding them just out of reach as he gave her car a once-over. "Taillights out," he said. She frowned. "That can't be right." Briggs finally looked at her. "Are you arguing with me?" A beat of silence passed. Renee could feel the shift in the air, that quiet, unspoken moment where power met resistance, and one side expected the other to cave. She'd seen it before. In briefings, on bases overseas, in training exercises meant to prepare sailors for the world outside the Navy. She knew better than to push, but she also knew her rights. "I'm just saying," she replied, voice calm. "My tail lights were checked a few weeks ago. But if there's an issue, I can get it fixed." "Step out of the car." Briggs cut her off like he hadn't heard a word. Renee exhaled slowly. She glanced toward the traffic ahead. No witnesses. She tapped her fingers against the steering wheel once, then reached for the door handle. "Mind telling me why?" she asked. Briggs tilted his head, smirking. "Because I said so." She let that hang in the air for a second, then unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the door open. The night air was cooler than she expected. She stepped onto the pavement, her posture relaxed but measured. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she wouldn't be bullied either. Briggs took a step back, scanning her. She could feel him sizing her up, deciding how much he could get away with. "Turn around. Hands on the car." This time she hesitated. "For what reason?" Briggs took a step closer. His smirk disappeared. "Are you resisting?" Renee held her ground. "No, I'm asking a question." A flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance. Amusement. Maybe both. Then, without warning, he reached for his radio. "We got a non-compliant driver here," he muttered into the speaker. Then louder, "Turn around." Her pulse picked up, but her expression stayed neutral. "Officer, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice low but firm. "I know exactly what I'm allowed to do, and I know exactly what you can't do." Briggs didn't like that. His jaw tensed. "You're under arrest," he snapped, reaching for her wrist. Renee moved before he could grab her, stepping back just enough to avoid his grip. "Under arrest for what?" Briggs pulled out his cuffs. "For obstructing an officer." She exhaled sharply through her nose. So that was his game. Her military training kicked in, heartbeat steady, breathing even. She knew she had two choices: comply and fight this later, or push back and risk escalation. She wasn't about to become another statistic. With slow, deliberate movements, she turned, placing her hands on the roof of her car. The metal was cool against her palms. Briggs wasted no time yanking her arms behind her back, tightening the cuffs far too much before shoving her toward the patrol car. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured. Briggs chuckled, shoving her into the back seat. "Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing." But he didn't. Not even close. The hard plastic seat of the patrol car dug into her back. Renee sat still, wrists burning against the cuffs, her breath measured. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing her in. Outside, Briggs strutted back to his vehicle, muttering something into his radio. She glanced at the partition separating her from the front seat. The faint reflection of her face stared back. Calm, composed. But beneath that, something simmered. She had been through combat drills, high-stakes operations, and interrogations in foreign territories. But this was different. This was a man with a badge, drunk on power, convinced he was untouchable. A few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. She shifted her hands slightly, testing the cuffs. Too tight. He had done it on purpose. The driver's side door swung open, and Briggs slid in, whistling. "Well, well," he muttered, pulling his seatbelt across his chest. "Let's take a little ride." She didn't respond. He threw the car into gear, pulling off the shoulder and back onto the road. The patrol car lurched forward, the overhead lights still flashing. She could see the reflection of the red and blue in the side mirrors, staining the road behind them. "You know," Briggs said after a moment, "most people just keep their mouths shut when I tell them to step out." Renee exhaled sharply through her nose. "And most officers don't arrest people for questioning a traffic stop." Briggs laughed, shaking his head. "Lady, you must really think you're somebody." She looked at him through the glass. "I don't think." "I know." That made him pause, just for a second. His knuckles flexed around the wheel, a flicker of irritation breaking through his smug exterior, but he covered it up quick. "You military?" he asked, his tone suddenly shifting. She didn't answer. "Yeah, I figured," he went on. "You got that attitude, that above-the-law type." He smirked. "Bet you thought I'd back off if you threw that around, huh?" Still, she stayed silent. Briggs clicked his tongue. "Shame," he mused, shaking his head. "If you'd just kept your mouth shut, we could have avoided all this." Her jaw tightened, the audacity of it, as if his actions were somehow her fault. The station came into view up ahead, a squat, grey brick building just off the main road. The parking lot was mostly empty. Late-night processing was slow, and for now it looked like she was the only guest. Briggs pulled into a reserved spot near the entrance, killed the engine, and turned to look at her through the partition. "Gotta say," he murmured, "I do love when they make it easy." Before she could respond, he was out of the car, slamming the door behind him. A second later, her door swung open. "Let's go," he ordered. Renee twisted her wrists slightly as she stepped out. The cuffs bit into her skin. He hadn't loosened them at all. She kept her head high as he led her inside, past a bored-looking desk sergeant, and into processing. The holding area smelled like old coffee and sweat. A metal bench lined the far wall, a steel door leading to the cells just beyond it. Briggs uncuffed her just long enough to push her through booking. Fingerprints, mugshot, the whole routine. The officers behind the desk barely looked up, just going through the motions. She had seen this kind of indifference before. It was the kind that let bad men like Briggs thrive. When it was over, he grabbed her wrist again, leading her toward the cells. "You think you're smart, huh?" he muttered under his breath. She glanced sideways. "I don't have to think." His grip tightened. She knew that got under his skin. "Enjoy your stay," Briggs sneered, shoving her toward the cell. Renee caught herself before she stumbled. She turned, watching as the metal bars slid shut between them. Briggs smirked from the other side, tapping the bars lightly with his fingers before walking away. The lock clicked into place. She took a slow breath, then sank onto the bench. The chill of the metal pressed through her jeans, grounding her. One night. That's all it would take. Because Briggs had no idea who he had just messed with. The metal bench was cold, hard, unforgiving. Renee shifted slightly, rolling her shoulders to ease the stiffness creeping in. The cell wasn't much. Just 4 walls, a single flickering light, and the faint smell of old sweat and disinfectant. She had spent nights in far worse conditions, in places where the threat wasn't just discomfort, but real danger. This was nothing. But that didn't mean she wasn't angry. Through the bars, she could hear the faint murmur of officers talking at the front desk, the occasional shuffle of paperwork, the clatter of a coffee cup against a desk. She exhaled, slow and steady. Control the breathing. Control the mind. Basic training drilled into her long before she even stepped foot into the fleet. Then, heavy footsteps. Briggs. She knew it was him before he even came into view. His stride had that same arrogant rhythm, like a man who thought he was untouchable. He appeared in front of the cell a second later, arms crossed over his chest, that same smirk plastered on his face. "Comfy?" She didn't answer. He tilted his head, stepping closer to the bars. "You know, if you'd just played along, you wouldn't be in here right now." She let a slow smile curl at the edges of her lips. "Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be." Briggs's smirk faltered for just a second. A flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance. Uncertainty. He covered it fast, scoffing as he glanced toward the empty holding area. "No one's coming to get you tonight, lady." He shrugged. "Guess that means you'll have some time to think about that attitude." Renee just watched him, unmoved, unshaken. Briggs leaned in slightly. "See, here's the thing," he continued, lowering his voice. "People like you think the rules don't apply. You think a little confidence is enough to get out of trouble." She let him talk, let him ramble. It didn't matter, because he didn't know what was coming. And then, as if on cue, another officer approached from the hallway. A younger guy, probably in his late 20s, dressed in a standard-issue uniform. He stopped a few feet away, holding a clipboard. Sergeant?" The officer's voice carried just a hint of uncertainty. "We got a call." Briggs barely glanced at him. "And?" The officer hesitated, shifted on his feet. "And? I think you need to see this." Briggs frowned, then gave Renee one last look before stepping away. She sat back, listening. The conversation was hushed, but she caught bits and pieces. Something about a lawyer, a call from higher up, questions about why she was being held. Briggs's voice dropped lower, sharp and annoyed. The younger officer stammered something in response, but whatever it was, it didn't seem to make him happy. Then, heavy footsteps again. Briggs stormed back, jaw tight, hands clenched into fists at his sides. His smirk was gone. "What the hell did you do?" Renee leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I didn't do anything." She tilted her head slightly. "But people talk, and some of us have friends in very high places." Briggs' face darkened. She could see it now, that moment of realization creeping in. The shift in power. He wasn't in control anymore. He turned on his heel, muttering something under his breath, and disappeared down the hallway. Renee exhaled. It wouldn't be long now. And when the truth came out, Briggs was going to regret every single decision that led him here. Morning light spilled through the narrow windows of the courthouse, casting long streaks across the polished floors. The air inside was crisp, the kind of cold that settled deep in your bones if you sat still too long. Renee stood near the defendant's table, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. She wasn't in handcuffs anymore. No orange jumpsuit, no holding cell. Just a well-tailored navy blue blazer, a simple blouse, and an undeniable presence. She wasn't alone. Beside her, her attorney, Carla Whitman, flipped through a stack of papers, barely glancing up as people trickled into the courtroom. The woman was efficient, methodical. No wasted movements, no small talk. Renee liked that. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Briggs walked in. He still carried himself like he owned the room, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. But there was a difference now, a stiffness in his step, a flicker of something in his expression that hadn't been there before. He wasn't as sure of himself anymore. Renee caught his eye. He looked away. Good. The judge entered, and the room quieted. Judge Alan Kirkland, an older man with a weary expression, adjusted his glasses as he settled in. He didn't waste time. "All right," he sighed, glancing over the case files. "Let's get to it." The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson, was unlawfully detained without probable cause. Furthermore, new information suggests a pattern of misconduct involving the arresting officer, Sergeant Daniel Briggs." A murmur rippled through the room. Briggs shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. The judge peered at him over his glasses. "Sergeant Briggs, care to explain?" Briggs leaned forward, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop." The prosecutor cut him off. "Uncooperative?" He turned, lifting a document from the table. "Lieutenant Commander Dawson's record shows a distinguished military career, graduate of the Naval Academy, multiple commendations, no criminal history, no outstanding citations. Are you telling me that despite all this she was such a threat that you had to arrest her over a broken taillight?" Briggs opened his mouth, then shut it. The silence stretched. The prosecutor continued, flipping through his papers. "Additionally, an internal review of your arrest history shows a disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers in this district." The murmurs grew louder. Briggs's face darkened. Judge Kirkland set his file down with a sigh. "Sergeant, I don't like what I'm hearing." Briggs sat back, crossing his arms. She resisted. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "The body cam footage says otherwise." Another ripple of noise moved through the room. Briggs looked at the judge, suddenly more defensive. "I was following standard procedure." Judge Kirkland wasn't buying it. He glanced toward the bailiff. "Let's play the footage." A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom. A video began to play. Renee didn't turn to watch. She had lived it. Briggs barking orders, her calm voice, the unnecessary escalation, the smug way he tightened the cuffs. The room was dead silent when the footage ended. Judge Kirkland leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Sergeant Briggs, you violated protocol. You conducted an unlawful arrest. And you failed to report the full details in your initial statement." Briggs opened his mouth, but the judge wasn't done. "The charges against Lieutenant Commander Dawson are hereby dismissed." His gavel came down, sharp and final. "And I strongly suggest an internal investigation into Sergeant Briggs' conduct." The tension in the room snapped like a pulled rubber band. Briggs looked like he had been punched in the gut. His face flushed red, hands clenched into fists at his sides. Renee simply exhaled. Slowly. Controlled. She never had a doubt. As she stood, collecting her things, she glanced toward Briggs one last time. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. They didn't need to be. Because this time, she wasn't the one who had to fight for her reputation. Briggs was. Briggs stormed out of the courtroom, his heavy footsteps echoing down the polished hallways. His face was tight, his jaw clenched. He could feel the eyes on him, other officers, court staff, even reporters who had shown up after word of the case spread. He wasn't used to this. He was used to control, to walking into a room and commanding respect or fear. But now, the power he had taken for granted felt like it was slipping through his fingers. And then came the worst part. "Sergeant Briggs!" A sharp voice cut through the hallway noise. He turned. Chief Eldon Baker stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The older man had been on the force for over 30 years, a respected figure in the department. His word carried weight. Briggs straightened. "Sir?" Baker studied him for a moment, then with a curt nod, motioned for Briggs to follow him into a private office. The second the door shut, the chief's tone dropped. "What the hell were you thinking?" Briggs exhaled sharply. "I was doing my job." "Your job?" Baker scoffed, tossing a file onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "That's not what it looks like from here. The body cam footage, the arrest history, the fact that you didn't even know who you were arresting. Briggs' nostrils flared. What does that have to do with anything? Baker leaned forward. Everything. His voice was quiet, but sharp. This wasn't some random woman. This was a high-ranking Navy officer. You think this is just going to disappear? Briggs looked away, grinding his teeth. She was disrespectful. She questioned you, Baker cut in. That's not a crime. Briggs scoffed, shaking his head. You don't get it. People like that. The chief's expression hardened. People like what, Briggs? Silence. Briggs swallowed but said nothing. Baker sighed, rubbing his forehead. The DA is reviewing every single one of your cases from the past 5 years. You've been flagged for racial profiling, and you better believe this department isn't going down with you. Briggs felt his stomach twist. What does that mean? Baker straightened. It means you're being put on immediate suspension. Effective now. Internal Affairs is investigating, and if they find what I think they're gonna find. He shook his head. Your career is over. The words hit Briggs like a punch to the gut. His face burned. This is bull. Baker held up a hand. Don't finish that sentence. His voice was ice. Pack up your desk. And if I were you, I'd get a lawyer. Briggs stood there, fists at his sides, his world unraveling in real time. And for the first time in his career, he realized he wasn't untouchable. Across town, Renee sat in a quiet cafe, stirring a cup of coffee as she scrolled through her phone. The case had already made headlines. The footage had gone viral. Lieutenant Commander wrongfully arrested. Officer under investigation. She wasn't surprised. She had known, from the second she stepped out of her car that night, how this would go. She had seen men like Briggs before, entitled, arrogant, used to bending the law in their favor. But this time, he lost. Her phone buzzed. A message from her attorney. Briggs has been suspended. Might face charges. Renee took a slow sip of her coffee. Good. She glanced out the window, watching the city move on around her. The fight wasn't over. Not for her, not for the people Briggs had likely hurt before. But today was a win. The crisp afternoon air carried the scent of fresh rain as Renee stepped out of the cafe. The weight of the past 24 hours should have lingered on her shoulders, but it didn't. She walked with the same confidence she always had, head high, steps steady. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she recognized. She sighed, then answered. Captain, Lieutenant Commander. The familiar voice greeted her. I assume you've seen the news. I have. A brief silence. Then, and how are you feeling? Renee glanced at her reflection in a nearby storefront window. She saw no signs of defeat, no cracks in her composure. I feel like I did exactly what I was supposed to do, she replied. The captain's voice softened. That's what I thought you'd say. A pause. The Department of Defense has taken interest in your case. Don't be surprised if they ask you to speak on it. Renee exhaled through her nose. Not sure I'm interested in being a headline. You already are, the captain countered. And whether you like it or not, what happened to you is a reflection of something bigger. She knew that. She had always known that. Briggs wasn't an isolated case. He was part of a system that had allowed officers like him to operate unchecked for years. This wasn't just about her. It was about the dozens, maybe even hundreds, of people who had been in her shoes but didn't have the rank, the legal team, or the voice to fight back. Renee leaned against a streetlight, watching the traffic move by. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, she said. And it won't be the last. No, the captain agreed. But it's the first time Briggs is facing consequences. And it's because you didn't back down. Renee closed her eyes for a second, letting those words settle. She didn't back down. Not when Briggs pulled her over. Not when he tried to intimidate her. Not when the cuffs tightened around her wrists. Not even when she spent the night behind bars, knowing full well the deck had been stacked against her. She had stayed firm. And now, she had won. The captain cleared his throat. One last thing, he added. You might be getting a call from the mayor's office. Renee's eyebrows lifted. Oh? Seems they want to recognize you for handling the situation with professionalism and grace. She smirked. Now that's ironic. The captain chuckled. You gonna accept it? Renee thought for a moment, then shrugged. I'll think about it. She ended the call and tucked her phone back into her pocket. Across the street, a mother walked with her young son, his small hand wrapped tightly around hers. He was laughing about something, carefree, full of life. Renee watched them for a moment. The next generation. She had fought for herself, yes, but she had also fought for him. For every black boy and girl who deserved to grow up in a world where men like Briggs couldn't wield their badges like weapons. She took a deep breath, and then she walked away, her steps firm, her purpose clear. Because this fight wasn't just hers. It never had been. Power unchecked is power abused. And the only way to change the system is to hold it accountable. What happened to Renee happens to people every day. People who don't have the privilege of rank, connections, or evidence to back them up. That's why it's important to speak up, to demand change, to refuse to stay silent. If this story made you think, share it. If it made you angry, talk about it. And if it made you realize how much work is left to do, stay engaged. Because real change starts with real conversations.